Hello, everyone. I wanted to take a few moments to give you a little bit of a synopsis of the concepts that we're working on this week and make sure that you're focusing in on some important features of our reading. So this week we are looking at the history of psychology, some of the various domains, current concepts in psychology, education, degrees that you can get in psychology, as well as some of the careers. So I asked each of you to go ahead and select a TED Talk that was of interest to you and then answer some questions. And what I'd like you to do now is to pause this video, and below where you clicked on the video, you're going to find a link to video number 1, and that is the TED Talk that I'd like you to watch now. Before you watch the video, I want you to think about why I might have asked you to watch it. What do you think it might have to do with psychology and what it might have to do with this particular class? So go ahead and hit pause and watch the TED Talk, and then come back. I'll give you a few minutes to do that. This is the actual link to the video that you will find below. Okay, after you have watched the video, I want you to think about a few questions. So, how do you edit your personal story if you're not happy with the one you're currently writing in your life? Psychology is a lot of things, and one of the things I really want you to remember, especially during this class, is that it has to do with you and your individual life. So one of the things that I want you to think about as we go through some of the concepts each week is that I hope through this class you learn to relate the various concepts to your own personal experiences, and then you really begin to write the story of who you are and what you want that story to be. I don't know why it skipped ahead quickly, but it did. So yes, I want you to write the story of who you are and what you want to be in this world. So let's get into some of the concepts. What is psychology? The basic definition that I want you to understand is that it's the science of human mental processes and behavior. It seeks to understand behavior, mental functions, and emotional processes of humans. And then psychologists explore how mental and emotional factors influence behavior and how these factors can be influenced by physiological and biological processes. Psychology looks to diagnose and treat mental illnesses, and then they also do research using the scientific method. And we will go over what the scientific method is next week. One thing that I want you to be aware of is clinical versus non-clinical psychology. So clinical psychologists focus on diagnosis and treatment of mental disorders and mental illnesses, and they work directly with clients and patients. Now, the difference with research psychologists is that they use the scientific method to explore relationships between various psychosocial variables and examine topics related to mental processes and behavior. These would be university professors, forensic psychologists, healthcare psychologists, and psychologists in the media. So where did psychology begin? It's a science today, but it's a pretty new science. And the early influence was actually from philosophy. So from approximately 600 to 300 BC, Greek philosophers explored a wide range of topics relating to what we now consider psychology. Socrates and his followers, such as Plato and Aristotle, wrote about such topics as pleasure, pain, knowledge, motivation, all things that psychologists still look at to this day. They theorized about whether human traits are innate or the product of experience. And that continues to be a really hot topic of debate in psychology today. You may have heard of this debate called nature versus nurture, and that really is looking at, are our behaviors and who we are an experience of our genes and we're born that way, or is it due to the fact that we have had certain experiences and were brought up a certain way, and then that's who we became who we are? Again, that's the nature versus nurture debate. Now, in the 17th century, René Descartes was a French mathematician and philosopher from the 1600s, and he theorized that the body and mind are separate entities. This is an important concept in the early stages of what became psychology, which was known as dualism. And according to dualism, the body is a physical entity with scientifically measurable behavior, while the mind is a spiritual entity that cannot be measured because it transcends the material world. So in the 17th century as well, Thomas Hobbes and John Locke were English philosophers from the 17th century, and they disagreed with this concept of dualism. They argued that all human experiences are physical processes occurring within the brain and the nervous system. As this view holds that the mind and body are one and the same, it became known as monism. So I would want you to definitely know the difference between what dualism and monism is. But today, most psychologists reject a rigid dualistic approach. Many years of research indicate that physical and mental aspects of human experience are deeply intertwined. So when we talk about psychology as an actual science, I would really want you to make sure that you understand who the father of psychology is. And that would be Wilhelm Vunt, if you want to pronounce it in the German way. So this is when psychology really becomes a science, and that's not until 1832 to 1920 when Wilhelm Wundt was alive. And he believed that study of conscious thoughts would be the key to understanding the mind. He published a landmark text called Principles of Physiological Psychology in 1874. And most importantly, in 1879, he created the first psychology lab at the University of Leipzig. Now, why is it important that he would be developing a lab? Well, that's because that in a lab, you can do controlled experiments. When you're able to control your experiments, you're often able to duplicate them and make sure that they are replicable and that other people can study the same thing. This lends us to be able to understand that the concepts and the ideas that we're looking at can be stated as fact or that are found via research. So a research lab is really when psychology became a science. So we have some contemporary views of psychology, and those are that psychology is a diverse field that's influenced by historical perspectives. So reflective of the discipline's diversity is the diversity seen within the American Psychological Association, also called the APA, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well next week. But what I want you to understand is that the APA is a professional organization representing psychologists in the United States. Psychologists agree that there is no one right way to study the way people think or behave. There are, however, various schools of thought that evolved throughout the development of psychology that continue to shape the way we investigate human behavior. So in contemporary psychology today, there are 5 domains of psychology, which are also called the pillars in the image below. So when we talk about domains and pillars, those are really one and the same. So when I would ask you about the 5 domains or pillars of psychology, I'd want you to understand that we have the biological domain, cognitive domain, the developmental domain, the social and personality domain, as well as the mental and physical health domain. So these modern psychology domains became more diverse with various perspectives, but in itself, psychology has become more specialized as we begin to learn how to study and recreate experiments. So today, psychologists identify themselves according to the perspective that they emphasize in investigating psychological topics and the specialty area in which they practice and have been trained. So what's the difference between psychologists and a psychiatrist? I get this question a lot. What I would want you to understand is that clinical psychologists are trained in the diagnosis, treatment, causes, and prevention of psychological disorders, and their degree would be a doctorate or a PhD or PsyD degree. So there are 2 different kinds of doctoral degrees that a clinical psychologist could have, those being the PhD or the PsyD. So psychiatrists, on the other hand, they have an actual medical degree. They've gone to medical school, and that was followed by specialized training in the diagnosis, treatment, causes, and prevention of psychological disorders. So these emphasize the biological factors, and they use biomedical therapies such as medication. So a psychiatrist is a medical doctor and has an MD degree or a DO, and they are able to prescribe medication. They really look at more of the biological factors that are affecting someone. Here's a graph just looking at what some of the specialty areas of psychologists are, as well as some employment settings of psychologists. Feel free to pause this video if you'd like to look at this in a little bit more detail. So obviously you're not going to click on this image below because it is a video, but I'm going to link this video underneath this presentation. And then you can see how psychologists really are in action. So I hope that you've enjoyed getting a quick view at some of the concepts that we're working on this week. As always, if you have questions, please feel free to let me know.